Dear listeners, feel the real fear with us. Horror stories from all over the country and abroad. Those who have been, are being, or will be involved in today's episode, greetings and luck to everyone. I hope everyone is well and healthy. Like every episode, I am with you all to present the events you sent. The incident happened about 30 to 40 years ago, sometime between 1985 and 1989. It was around 1 am. There was a person named Albert who was a young man at that time. He had been married for about 2 years. As the eldest son of the family, he had all the responsibilities on his shoulders. He was strong, muscular, and very courageous. At the time, he used to farm the lands around his house, which were his family's. Additionally, he had 2 wild buffaloes. His main job was driving the buffalo cart. He used the buffalo cart to transport various items. Sometimes Albert would drive the buffalo cart all day long, so he couldn't feed the buffaloes properly during the day. Therefore, he had to feed them at night. To do this, Albert would take the buffaloes to the grasslands at night. After letting the buffaloes eat, Albert would either lie down or sit somewhere nearby. Once the buffaloes finished eating, he would return home just before or after the morning prayer call. Sometimes he would very late at night. Afterward, he would sleep for a little while and the buffaloes would rest too. Then he would leave home a bit later in the morning. One night, Albert took the buffaloes to a place about 2 or 3 kilometers away from his house to feed them. He usually carried a 5 battery flashlight with him, and that night was no different. Upon reaching the place, Albert let the buffaloes graze in the grass and went a little further to sit on higher ground near some fields. The area was surrounded by fields on 3 sides, and on one side there was a large, dense jungle. In the middle of this area, there was an old banyan tree. Albert sat by this tree, leaning against it and keeping an eye on the buffaloes. After sitting for about an hour and a half, he started feeling sleepy. It was around 1:30 or 2 am. Suddenly, he noticed a light coming from the jungle, moving slowly toward him. Albert initially thought it might be someone bringing cattle, but then he realized it was a ball of fire. This fireball slowly floated around the spot where he was sitting. Albert stood up and stared at the ball, mocking it and saying various things. In an instant, the fireball vanished into the air. Albert lit his flashlight and looked around, but there was nothing. The buffaloes were still eating the grass calmly. A little while later, Albert noticed something resembling a jackal coming out of the jungle. This figure moved slowly toward him, and soon it appeared to transform into a large cow. It then changed into a large white horse. The figure kept changing its shape as it approached Albert. This time, he noticed that the buffaloes started running around in a chaotic manner. His grandfather thought of going to the women and calming them down, but it seemed like he couldn't move from there. Albert thought of going to the buffaloes and calming them down, but it seemed like he couldn't move from there. Then he saw something strange. A white horse-like shape was coming closer, but as it came near, it suddenly turned into a dwarf-like figure. The thing stopped and stood still for a while, just like a statue. not moving at all, had burned down all the way to his nails, but he couldn't drop it. He felt as if his body had frozen. Suddenly, the creature jumped up into the sky like a rocket. He regained his strength and grabbed his flashlight, trying to see where it went. The sky was clear, and he couldn't find anywhere. At that moment, he was a bit scared and decided to leave with the people and head back home. He sat under the banyan tree, thinking the buffaloes might come down after a while. After sitting for a few minutes, he suddenly realized that something slippery was dripping from above onto his body and head, and a strong foul smell filled the air. He pointed the flashlight upward and saw something that made his body freeze with fear. Hanging upside down from the tree like a bat was a dwarf-like creature. Its skin was so dark that the flashlight reflected off it, and it looked wet. From its body, the slippery substance kept dripping down. The creature had a flat nose with 2 holes in it, and it was grinning in a creepy way, but no sound of laughter was heard. Albert stood frozen in fear, realizing that he was dealing with something evil. When he came to his senses, he tried to recite some religious verses, but he was so scared that he couldn't focus. Suddenly, the creature spoke, asking, "Why are you fighting with me? Have I ever blocked your path or harmed you? You decided to fight me. Now let's see who's stronger. If you want to fight, you can't leave until I let you." The creature quickly climbed down the tree, and he regained his strength. He jumped away from the tree, thinking it might be his last night. He knew he had to escape, but if he was going to face this creature, he needed to do so with courage. As he tried to run, the creature followed him. No matter which direction he turned, it always came in front of him. Realizing that there was no way to escape without facing it, he decided to fight. He thought the creature was only about 3 to 3.5 feet tall, and as he charged at it, he tried to grab it, but it was so slippery that he couldn't hold on. Even when he hit it, his punches slipped off its body, and it seemed like the creature wasn't harmed at all. There was a terrible smell coming from his body. The biggest challenge for him was to hold on to it. No matter what, he couldn't keep it, as there were several reasons holding him back. Then the bad smell became stronger. Meanwhile, that thing kept attacking him. So their fight continued like this for a long time. Eventually, Albert got seriously injured. His body was badly cut in various places. Finally, that thing let go of him and said, "I will leave for today through the canal, but don't think that I have left for good. We'll meet again and we'll fight once more. Be ready." After that, the thing went back to the banyan tree, turned upside down, and climbed up the tree. At that point, the call for Fajr prayer had already been made, but it didn't happen immediately. Albert went unconscious, but not fully. It took a while for him to fully lose consciousness. He couldn't remember exactly when the prayer call was heard, but he had been listening to it for a while. After a long time, he couldn't remember anything. He might have fainted or something happened. Meanwhile, at home, Albert's father, mother, and wife were up for Fajr prayer. They noticed that Albert wasn't in the house, but his 2 buffaloes were standing in front. They thought maybe he had gone to the pond to take a bath, as he did that daily. But after some time, Albert's wife went to his in-laws and said, "Your son hasn't come home today. He usually comes late, but today he hasn't returned." The parents got worried, thinking he had stayed out longer than usual. His father, Lucas, went to check by the pond, but when he arrived, he saw no signs of Albert or anyone else. Lucas returned home and informed the family. He then went to the buffaloes and noticed that the ropes were missing from their necks, which was unusual. He realized that the buffaloes must have returned home by themselves. This made him worried that something bad happened to his son. By now, the sun was fully up, and Albert's family and other villagers began calling out and searching everywhere. They couldn't find Albert. Lucas told everyone to split into groups and search the areas where they had taken the animals for food. One group went to the place where Albert had fainted, and from a distance they saw him lying upside down. They ran over to him and found that Albert was unconscious. They noticed many signs of injury on his body. They brought him back to the empty house. For the next 4 days, Albert remained unconscious. A doctor and an exorcist were called, but nothing helped. After 4 days, Albert finally regained consciousness. At first, he couldn't speak, but after a while, he started to speak in unclear words. After 2 more days, he was mostly recovered and told everyone about the terrifying event that had happened that night. Albert's father Lucas had a sense that this was a bigger problem than just a normal one. If it were a simple issue, Albert would have said, "I won't mess with you again." But instead, the thing had told him, "We will meet again and fight once more." This made Lucas realize the severity of the situation. Later in the afternoon, Lucas brought a bigger exorcist to the house. When the exorcist started his work, he looked at the sky and began praying. He said, "I am leaving. I won't come back. Please forgive me." After this, he quickly packed his things and left, saying, "I can't stay here even for a moment, or I will be finished." Albert's father, Lucas, understood that this was no simple issue. It was something much worse, as the spirit had said, "I will come back to fight again." Saying this, the exorcist left, but Albert's father, Lucas, realized that it was a complex problem. If it had been a simple issue, the spirit would have said something like, "If you survive today, you will never do this again." But instead, the spirit said, "You will meet again. There will be another battle." That's why this problem was more complicated. The exorcist, facing upwards, prayed and quickly ran off with his bag. But things became even more complicated. What was happening now? More problems began to surface. The issue wasn't just faced by Albert, it happened when he went outside. During the day, it wasn't much of a problem. But as soon as evening fell, things started get worse. As soon as it became evening, the spirit, this dark, ominous presence appeared. He could see it everywhere he went. Even in the restroom, he would see it outside. There was a hole in the door, and he could see it moving around the outside. There was always a terrible stench, but it didn't attack him. It just appeared, haunting him. Albert's father, Lucas, found a knowledgeable person, a scholar, and asked him about his son's problems. The scholar's name was Maulana Alan, and people in the area called him Alan. Alan had learned how to drive away spirits from his grandfather, who was a doctor and had special knowledge. At that time, Alan was the imam of the local mosque and was well known in the area. It was said that if anyone had a problem with a spirit, they only needed to mention Alan's name, and the spirit would leave immediately. Albert's grandfather, Caleb, hoped that Alan could help his son. After hearing about the problem, Alan agreed to help. Alan, Caleb, and Albert then set off for their home, although it was about an hour's walk from Alan's place. The path was difficult, crossing 45 villages to get there. When they arrived at the house, Alan paused at the entrance, looking troubled. Caleb, noticing his worry, asked what was wrong. Alan said that the spirit Albert had summoned wasn't just any spirit. It wouldn't come unless it was invited. It was powerful and required special handling. Alan, who had dealt with many spirits, knew that this would not be easy. Caleb's home was far from Alan's, which made it even more difficult. That evening, Alan stayed at Albert's house. The next day, after the evening prayer, Alan placed a prayer mat in front of Albert and began reading verses from the Quran. After about 10 to 15 minutes of prayer, the spirit finally appeared, saying, "Alan, you called me? I am here because you are a respected person. Don't think I am weak. You know who I am. I could do whatever I want." Alan replied calmly, "Yes, I know who you are, but why are you troubling an innocent person like Albert?" The spirit responded, "Innocent? You don't know what he's been saying. He's challenging me. He says he could defeat me, but that's just foolishness. He doesn't know what he's dealing with." Alan, remaining calm, asked the spirit to forgive Albert, explaining that he didn't understand the situation. The spirit, after hearing this, began speaking again. Then the person started saying, "No, I won't forgive in this way. I will fulfill his wishes. He doesn't want to fight with me, but I am determined to fulfill his desires. I will make him understand what I want." After this, Alan suggested, "Please forgive him and stop following him." But it was adamant, saying, "You can give me whatever you want, but let him go." The jinn angrily replied, "There is nothing left to take from humans. Don't try to tempt me with these things. The things you would give me are of no use to me. Go away. I don't want to harm you. You are a respected person, and so are your father and grandfather. I don't want to stain my hands with your blood. Go away." With this, the jinn left Albert's body. Around the same time, certain bonds were placed in the area, which could only be broken by very powerful jinn. The jinn left in its own way, and Albert collapsed unconscious on the ground. Then the holy man instructed to lay Albert down on the bed and ask others to be careful. Huzur became worried and asked Caleb and Alan what had happened. They asked, What did the holy man say? What can be done?" Huzur explained that the situation was very complicated. Rarely does such a problem occur, but when it does, the person involved suffers greatly. These jinn are from a spiritual nature and do not normally attack humans unless provoked. The main issue is that most of the time the person affected may die. These jinn don't harm anyone's lineage, but when someone calls them or disturbs them, they can bring harm. They don't usually stay with one family for long, but act swiftly to end the life of the person they focus on. After that, they move on to other things. When Albert's father heard this, he became very concerned. Meanwhile, Huzur's student, who collected information, shared some details about the jinn with him. Huzur began explaining that this particular jinn belonged to a category of rock-type jinn. These jinn can change shapes, but they are not extremely powerful. However, some of these rock-type jinn meditate for 1200 years to become very powerful. They live a long life and grow stronger through their practices. These jinn are not naturally strong at birth, but after meditating in specific places like near large trees or abandoned areas, they grow more powerful. Every 12 years, they move to a new location, and this particular jinn had been meditating for 924 years. The place it intended to go next was beneath an old banyan tree where Albert had sat. But when the jinn encountered Albert, it was provoked by his mocking of its power. This angered the jinn and led it to plan serious harm to Albert. Then clarified that this jinn doesn't follow any religion, neither Islam, Hinduism, Judaism, nor Buddhism. So, no priest or religious figure could perform an exorcism. This task would be very difficult. However, Huzur assured that he would do his best to resolve the situation. Huzur then performed an exorcism, temporarily sealed the house, and advised that breaking the jinn's bond would be very challenging. But he assured that with time the bond would break. He also instructed that Albert should not be allowed to go anywhere alone, especially at night. During the day, he could go out, but never alone. Huzur planned to meet again to figure out how to solve the issue. During this time, Albert followed all the instructions and there were no issues. However, he experienced a strong, unpleasant smell at night. These bad smells were not noticed. It seemed like nothing had been happening for some time. After about 34 days, Alan returned to Albert's house. He said that he had consulted with his teacher regarding the matter. The teacher would try to solve it. However, no one knows whether he will succeed. The chance of success is only 20 to 30%, and the rest is the chance of failure. So the possibility of success is very low. Since the chance is 20 to 30%, that's about a on chance, so they will try. Since Alan had already gotten involved with this issue, if they couldn't solve it completely, there might be some trouble for him. Therefore, Alan assured that he would solve it definitely. Alan's teacher also gave him more information about the jinn, which Alan shared with Caleb. It was found that these jinn do not respond easily to being controlled. Once they have power over someone, they do not want to leave unless they are forced. These jinn cannot be sent away easily by anything. However, if they are merciful, they will leave voluntarily. But if they want something in return, they will give conditions. These conditions are strange, like giving cows, goats, or chickens, and they can demand whatever they wish. Then the teacher said, "Let's see what happens today." The teacher told Caleb that an empty room was needed for the work. In that room, Albert should not be alone. He was to be accompanied by 3 other strong, brave men. Following the teacher's advice, the grandfather selected a room. 3 of his cousins were present in that room as well. After the evening prayer, the teacher began his work. Just like last time, the teacher sat on his prayer mat and began reciting from the Quran. The room was surrounded by a circle of protection, and the teacher kept reading, which caused the jinn to appear. The reason why strong men were present in the room was in case any problems occurred, they could try to stop it. But at that moment, the jinn's arrival was not yet felt. After some time, everyone in the room realized that a huge storm had started outside, and it seemed like the house would be blown away. Then everything suddenly stopped, and the jinn appeared for the second time, processing. Then everything suddenly stopped, and the jinn appeared for the second time, possessing Albert's body. In an irritated voice, the jinn said, "Why are you calling me again? I already told you everything. You have been asking your jinn students and even went to your teacher to get information about me. So why are you bothering me again?" The teacher responded, "I understand that I have learned about you. If you wish, you can forgive Albert. I didn't know who you are, and I hope you will forgive him." The jinn replied, "I will not forgive him. You know that. If you have any other actions to take against me, like trying to imprison me, go ahead and try. Let's see if you can." The teacher knew that such actions would not be effective, so he continued speaking with humility. Eventually, the jinn gave a condition: "I will fight Albert once again, but this time it must happen in the middle of the night at the banyan tree. You must not use any tricks to help you in this fight. That is my condition." Alan pleaded with the jinn, "All right, we accept your condition, just please do not harm him." The jinn said, "Since I am the one offering a solution, you can be sure I won't harm him. But I am angry with him. He challenged me to fight, and now I will fight him. There will be a fight with you again, so I won't let it go without a fight. I know I won't hit him, but he has to go alone." Then the priest says, "Okay, I accept your condition." But after this, they didn't cause any harm. This made them anxious. They were told, "We won't harm you anymore." Then the jinn left. After it left, Alan began to speak, saying that now certain conditions must be met and there's no other way to survive. But he assured them, saying, "Don't be afraid. I have many jinn followers around to help you. However, since I made a promise, no conspiracies can be involved. They will be around you, but you cannot approach them, and they won't harm you." He continued, "The full moon night will bring the battle, and there are only 5 days left. Inshallah, we will win. There is no other way." He gave them more advice, mentioning that they should follow certain practices for the next 5 days. He added that in any battle against jinn, some part of the person's body gets damaged, as the jinn can destroy something in the body. Since the jinn had promised not to harm them, they had to accept that some damage was inevitable. However, if they followed the practices, it wouldn't damage vital organs, just smaller ones. In exchange, their lives would be spared. Hearing this, the father told the scholar, "As long as the boy survives, that's enough. Please proceed." After finishing that night's work, the scholar stayed at the house. Surprisingly, despite a heavy storm, no one else in the house noticed anything unusual. The scholar explained that the jinn's magic was the reason only they could sense it, and the others couldn't. The next morning, the scholar left. After 5 days, he returned with 5 other scholars. After dinner that night, when everyone was leaving the house, he informed them, "There is a way to save him, and since the jinn promised not to harm him, I am sure you won't. The jinn always keeps its word, so if you don't let him go, you will lose him forever." With tearful eyes, they bid him farewell. The scholars reached the location between 11 p.m. and midnight. The scholar told the father, "Now I must go alone. There is no power in this world greater than Allah. Trust in the light and move forward." The 5 scholars remained behind, reading the Quran from a distance. Albert slowly moved towards the banyan tree, sensing something strange around him. He noticed no animals nearby, only the faint sound of a jackal. Gathering courage, he moved forward. Suddenly, everything became completely silent. Only the scholars' murmured prayers could be heard. A strong wind began to blow, bending the trees, but strangely, the wind didn't touch his body. Then there was a loud noise from the banyan tree, followed by a terrible stench. The atmosphere grew heavier with the smell, and after some time it started to fade. Then he heard a voice saying, "You came to test strength, now you will see it." The jinn appeared, but now it was not the small form. It was much larger. The jinn spoke, "I made a mistake. Please forgive me." The jinn continued, "I will forgive you, but after this battle I will leave. Remember, I don't take anything from everyone. No gifts or offerings. I have no family, no tribe. I am a solitary being, which is why I have no attachments. I am only here to fight, and that is the solution." At that time, the jinn was standing about 5 to 6 feet away from Albert. It was no longer the dwarf shape it used to be. Now it had a terrifying form. Upon seeing this, Albert's body froze like stone. Suddenly he realized the jinn wasn't alone. Many others, exactly like it, surrounded him. Albert stood firm, using all his strength to face them. Then he saw that these creatures were staring at him, laughing horribly. He watched as one jinn merged with another. Initially there were 8 of them, but soon only 4 remained. After a while, all of them merged into one. Then the jinn attacked him, but Albert tried his best to defend himself. However, in just 30 seconds, he couldn't keep up. The fight ended quickly. How the jinn beat him on one finger. Immediately after that, Albert lost consciousness. But in those 30 seconds, Albert had noticed a person wearing a robe resembling a jinn standing far away. This person appeared to be gazing at him with pity, and there seemed to be a torch-like light circling around their head. The figure was muttering something, but Albert couldn't understand. After the bite, he lost all senses of awareness. Later, after the Fajr prayer, Alan, 5 scholars, and Caleb, Albert's father, came to the spot and found Albert lying unconscious. He was taken home before noon. By afternoon, Albert realized that he couldn't move his left hand. The bite on his finger had left clear tooth marks. The next day, Albert came back and declared that everything was fine now. The jinn had gone and Albert was safe. That night, Alan shared that the person in the robe was actually Bud's jinn, who had been praying from a distance for Albert's protection, hoping no greater harm would come to him. Even though the jinn had many tricks, it didn't use them on Albert. The jinn knew beforehand that the situation would involve some sort of cunning, but didn't bother with it. It left Albert and vanished. According to the scholars, within a month, the finger that had been bitten started to dry and bend. However, Alan mentioned that the strength would return to the hand. Indeed, over time, Albert's hand and body regained their strength, except for that one finger, which remained permanently bent and dried. Albert passed away in 2018. Albert would sometimes visit and talked about their relatives, sharing stories. If anyone asked, he would tell this tale. Grandfather would sometimes visit and talk about their relatives, sharing stories. If anyone asked, he would tell this tale explaining what happened. Grandfather often told the story to Carl and others when they asked. The lesson to be learned from this story is that it is unwise to engage in unnecessary arguments or challenges, especially when bravery is not needed. So that was the story. These were the traits of the type of people in the administration back then. What are these traits really like? You can understand it from the events of today. The lesson we can learn from this is that we shouldn't go out of our way to start fights or challenge others. There are times when courage is needed, and in those moments we must show it, but there's no need to show bravery by unnecessarily picking a fight with someone. Forgot about that day, but if we treat people this way, won't they get angry? Won't they feel hurt? Of course they will. And these people are very cunning and strong. If you act this way toward them, they will only get angrier. So remember, bad behavior from others until the end of our lives. And this matter is even more sensitive. So you can understand why we need to stay away from this kind of actions. If you have had any such miraculous and scary incident, you can send it to thehorrorstories@yahoo.com, and we will try to read the story in the next episode.